Falling short. Issues of Uncle J.
Man, I can't believe I fell for that Kimura, said Rupert, a young, strong, 6'1" Caucasian, athletically built man in his 20s, as he walked off the mat with me after an intense Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu session. With you? It's all about setting traps, I responded, feeling rather good with myself. I was so focused on passing your guard, I left my hand exposed. I do love rolling with guys like you because I can go all out power-wise and not feel bad. I try my best to be fast and technical with you. Which, to be honest, is the perfect game plan for me because I'm all about minimum effort and maximum results. I've noticed. Is it me or have you got heavier? I've got heavier. What happened with the diet? I've been so bad lately. Yesterday, I ate so much food that despite skipping breakfast and just finishing a 2-hour BJJ session, I'm still full. Not good, man. Tell me about it. At least you're keeping active, I guess.
Episode 13, Martial Arts. There was a time, say the first 6 years of my life, the concept of violence was alien to me, which now that I think about it is pretty common amongst a lot of people. Anyway, I was a very gentle child who when faced with violence would simply freeze. When other kids would get in my face or push me around, the thought of fighting back or confronting them in any way wasn't even in my psyche. Despite having a mother that yelled a lot, I wasn't shy about giving me the odd slap. Things changed when I moved to Nigeria, as now I was in a world where violence was thrown at me from all directions, be it from teachers, uncles, aunties, fellow students, tutors, siblings, mother, or even total strangers. I remember my first fight, which was more of a one-sided beatdown, was with a fellow year 2 boy. I think his name was Damola, in my class, who was smaller than me, but a lot tougher, as he was raised on the mean streets of Lagos. This meant he was an African thug in the making. I don't even know what started the fight, as I wasn't the confrontational type. However, the fight started, and it led to me being beaten up pretty comprehensively. My cousins, Bolaji and Rotimi, got wind of what happened and insisted on training me in how to defend myself, which really was an excuse to rough me up more than usual, which actually toughened me up, in the sense I became very well acquainted with the 2 basic elements of being in a fight, which was the ability to give and take a beating. After about 5 weeks, I became an unrefined brawler with a fighting style based on taking opponents down and pounding them. With my newfound skill set, I went out of my way to provoke Damola. He of course bit, and in turn I put a beating on him, which invoked fear into many of our classmates who witnessed what happened. I had no desire to be a bully. I instead became the people's champion, fending off bullies from other classes, and I enjoyed my newfound hero status until things got out of hand. One morning, my classmates alerted me to a bully that had been bothering them at the school sand field. I, without asking any questions, answered the call, only to find myself standing before a boy called Yemi. He was a Damola Mark II, because he was also an African thug in the making, but he was around 2 years older and noticeably bigger. Knowing my fans were watching, I hid my farewell, while asking Yemi to stop bothering my friends, while he responded with a laugh. Then, without warning, I unleashed my special attack, a solid punch to the gut followed by a well-placed uppercut, which had vanquished at least 3 previous opponents. As Yemi hit the floor, my fans cheered for joy. Then something terrifying happened. Yemi got up and casually dusted the sand off his uniform, before turning his head to the side to spit. He then looked right at me and asked, "Is that it?" Yemi then proceeded to chase me around the whole school until the bell rang for class. Despite my obvious shortcomings in this episode, I was still the people's champion. What can I say? A child's hero is not easily debunked. When I was about 6 years old, I remember catching a glimpse of Jackie Chan in the movie Drunken Master, but wasn't really excited by it. In fact, I was rather indifferent. I guess it was partly due to the fact that at that age, I had no desire or reason to fight as far as I was concerned. Fast forward to when I was about 8 years old. After being surrounded, as well as being on the receiving end of numerous beatings, I saw Bruce Lee. I was in awe, because he was the coolest thing I had ever seen. After that, my mind was bombarded with fantasies of taking out all my tormentors, like Bruce Lee had done in his movies. These fantasies began to manifest themselves on the playground. In fact, I remember Rotimi being cornered by his classroom bully, a boy who had been held back a few times, so was a good 3 years older than Rotimi and a lot bigger. Seeing this, I ran for behind with a Bruce Lee-like scream and executed the most perfect flying kick you would ever see, which floored the bully and allowed Rotimi to escape. This act was witnessed by my fans, solidifying my status as the people's champion. Back then, I had a good friend called David, who was also a Bruce Lee enthusiast, and we used to fly kick each other from behind for fun. What can I say? We were rough and weird. My exposure to violence and all things Bruce Lee, and the anger that began to manifest and grow within, meant I began to fight a lot. From year 2 all the way to year 10 saw me fight like I was a professional fighter defending a title. I definitely won more fights than I lost, and things were getting out of control. I remember in year 10, my last school year in Nigeria, I got into a fight with this boy called Chinedu, who was the most feared boy in our year. He was 6 feet 3 inches with a muscly athletic build, which effortlessly towered over my 5 foot 5 inches athletic build. For all you fight fans, he was easily an MMA light heavyweight, 205 pounds, and I was an MMA featherweight, 145 pounds. I was no pushover, but my fight with Chinedu simply illustrated the reasons why weight classes exist in combat sports. On top of that, I had a limited fighting style that was rooted in wrestling and brawling, which was a recipe for defeat against a bigger, stronger opponent. I took it to Chinedu, having moments while putting up a good fight, but let's just say I had a lot more bumps and bruises than he did after the fight. I remember when I moved to London, I wanted to do and be better, which partly involved not getting into fights all the time. And I did succeed because I hardly, if at all, got into any real fights when I moved back to England. I remember being challenged by Felix because I kept opening the door, which underneath was really because he hated my guts for seemingly being more settled than him at the time. At the time I didn't really want to hurt him, plus physically he was no match for me, as even though he was the same height, he was light enough to be totally defenseless against me. Ironically, Phoenix introduced me to the John Moe Wing Chun School in Manor House area of London. It was under the tutelage of Joseph Man, who in terms of Kung Fu was related to my childhood hero Bruce Lee, as his teacher trained with Ip Man, who taught Bruce Lee. And obviously because Joseph Man was even mentioned in the same breath as Bruce, I was more than sold on the idea of training there. Training at John Moe was a mixed bag, as majority of the senior instructors were egotistical and were mainly there for self-indulgence. At times, they came across as a pack of middle-aged men, having some kind of midlife crisis, desperate to feel relevant at the expense of the self-worth of others. And this applied to all except Spencer, a Caucasian Jackie Chan type character, who was relatively much younger and nicer. Then there was Tony A, who at the time was just young and incredibly arrogant in a Cobra Kai kind of way. I remember the school went to a martial arts exhibition at the Birmingham NEC Arena, during which Tony A, who at the age of 27 challenged 19-year-old me because I refused to train with him, which was because he was way too rough. And even though he was probably twice the fighter I was at the time, I was so sick of his nonsensical attitude, I was ready to go to war with him in public. Plus, I was no slouch with a bit of height and size on him. Now looking back, a fight would have meant me getting my butt handed to me, but he wouldn't have walked away scratch-free. But I digress, as I was highlighting the fact that at John Moe, very little care and real consideration was given to the students. And this was shown with the instructors taking money from students for a project and then not delivering the project and then not giving a refund. And Joseph Man's wife was hot on getting money out of us for training and gear. Joseph Man himself was to an extent a pretty good teacher who clearly had a passion for teaching people Wing Chun. And this showed with his willingness to allow me to learn at the school for free while I was at university and struggling. And I was ready to learn as much as I could by listening and watching everyone around me, as well as making notes and practicing by myself, because this was my chance to get the skills of big screen heroes like Bruce Lee and Jet Li in real life. My dedication and imagination led to me getting pretty good, so much so, even people like Tony A couldn't help but notice. I knew I was good, but I didn't realize how good until after university, at which point I had left John Moe and was mainly practicing by myself. I began to do some sparring with kickboxers and boxers in the East London area. It was during this time I found I had a knack for effortlessly applying concepts of Wing Chun within the chaos of real combat. I refined my skills so much that I considered having a professional career in mixed martial arts and went as far as having one semi-pro fight. But issues to do with diet led to me giving up on that idea. Now, I utilize my martial arts knowledge and skills to maintain a healthy work-life balance and positively interact with others as a friend, acquaintance, and even a Mr. Miyagi-type figure. This sees me do some type of training every day, which includes sparring in BJJ, boxing, or MMA twice a week. Martial arts has been good therapy for me physically and mentally because it is one of the only things I can do for personal satisfaction and be content. As the simple truth is, the more you train, the better you become, and the more you're able to adapt to your environment as well as yourself. A fact that is free from opinion or prejudice and can serve as a life lesson across many realms of development. My Anime Life, Episode 13. Along with the grueling conditioning of Serpent Dove training came combat training, which involved learning hundreds of fighting forms from the realm of both striking and grappling, both in terms of performing and learning every technique in each form, both obvious and subtle, which meant relentless drilling fueled by receiving as well as the threat of pain. On top of all that came able-bodied men from the street being paid to attack trainees during people observation sessions. Like with other elements of Serpent Dove training, not everyone survived, and the ones who did at first only noticed attackers once the assault started. Then there's senses like hearing and noticing variables like shadows, people's looks, and behaviors that seemed out of place, no matter how masked, began to get heightened. Then their overall senses were so heightened that they began to sense intent from as far as a mile away, which added to an array of combat abilities that were already otherworldly. At 16 years old, when Jay reached this point, he set out to execute the vow he quietly made to himself when released from his cell at the age of 7. Stealthily moving through the compound, without literally making a sound, Jay slipped into Toshi's room, where the master assassin calmly waited for his pupil's arrival. Toshi, being aware of Jay's presence, fitted in perfectly with the young assassin, making his presence known to the target at hand. As Jay engaged Toshi in combat, other than the odd clean shot landed by Jay, he was emotionally separated by the moment. Utilizing all his training, Jay was practically stone cold. Toshi had only two ways of winning: be the better fighter or catch Jay unawares. However, at this point, there wasn't an unenhanced human being alive Jay couldn't defeat. Plus, on top of scoping out Toshi's chambers, the young warrior knew his instructor like the back of his hand. Toshi fought with mind-blowing skills, so much so Jay found himself severely marked up by the fight. But the teenager was too determined, too prepared, and too much of a fighter to be denied victory. Toshi soon found himself at the end of the blade his top pupil had been wielding. It was here Jay became aware of the audience subtly hidden in the shadows. Like stated earlier, Jay was very much, although not completely, emotionally detached from the fight. So much so he was able to understand that defeating and even killing Toshi was nothing more than an initiation exercise he had to go through as a Serpent Dove assassin, which meant Toshi was no less a victim in all this than he was. Jay wanted to hate Toshi, but he couldn't. As this revelation instantly hit Jay, he tossed his weapon aside and walked back to his room. Falling Short complete series can be found on JOMAJ Studios' YouTube channel. Falling Short is also available in paperback book format or on Kindle. To get your copy, email jomajstudios@gmail.com. That's jomajstudios@gmail.com.